Well, joining me on the show this evening, Najwa Asran, the CNBC Arabia Kuwait Bureau Chief. Thanks very much, Mrs. Aran, for being with us. This is indeed a very significant visit, given the fact that, India and Kuwait have been strong allies and we have our relationship that is deeply rooted. But trade is certainly one of the most important cornerstones of our relationship, given the fact that Kuwait is amongst India's largest crude suppliers. What are some of the new avenues that the two nations are looking at now?
Hi, Veranda. Well, actually, it's quite surprising that despite this very close relationship with Kuwait, the Indian expats represent more than 30% of the expat workforce here in Kuwait, more than 20% of the population of Kuwait, and the long history that goes back a long way. And I have interviewed many Kuwaiti merchants, and they always tell me about their life and how they and their fathers before them used to go to India, and they used to live there for 6 months in India and 6 months in Kuwait. So India indeed is a very important part of the culture and heritage of Kuwait, even Indian food, Indian movies. So it was quite surprising to me to find out that there hasn't been a visit by a Prime Minister of India to Kuwait in more than 4 decades. That's quite surprising. However, that doesn't mean there wasn't an exchange of visits from high dignitaries from both sides, but it's just surprising because actually India is a very important part of the Kuwaiti culture. And as I told you, the Indian expat community is the biggest expat community in Kuwait. So it's important to maintain this kind of relationship, and that's why the visit is very important and comes at a very important time when the entire region is going through very difficult times, as you know. Kuwait maintains a very balanced perception and approach to most political aspects, to most political development. I think it's similar to India in some way. However, only one issue which Kuwait is very strong about is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I think this is one of the challenges in the region at the moment. So the visit is very important. And as you see, the Prime Minister of India was bestowed the Order of Mubarak al-Kabir, which is a very important honor from Kuwait. So I think this visit comes at a very important time. And you have a question?
Yes, that's a very important point, in fact, Mr. Strand, that you made, that the visit comes at a very important time geopolitically as well. And we have seen that there has been a realignment of sorts between India and Kuwait in terms of our principles of peace vis-a-vis both India and the Gulf nations, particularly Kuwait, talking about a lasting peace solution, given the kind of volatile environment that we are seeing in West Asia with the war and, of course, what's happening in Syria as well. Do you see India and Kuwait perhaps in pole position to be, proponents of peace and perhaps negotiators when it comes to the situation in West Asia?
And I think the most important aspect of the relation between India and Kuwait will always be the economic side of the relationship.
Yes.
I mentioned the expat community in Kuwait. Also the trade between India and Kuwait. It was more than $10 billion last year.
Yes.
I think there is a room for much more in the future. And actually, the increase in the trade was more than 30% annually on an annual basis. So it shows you there is still room for more for improving this figure. I think also that Kuwait has a very important 2035 plan for improving the infrastructure for a lot of projects. And I think the Indian Prime Minister will probably be focusing on this during his talks with the Kuwaiti side on how to make sure that the Indian companies can participate in these kinds of projects in the future. I think this probably would be the main focus of talks between the two sides, how to improve further the bilateral economic relations between Kuwait and India, and how can India participate. And I think Prime Minister Modi, he had an interview with Kuna, the Kuwaiti news agency, and he mentioned the 2035 plan for Kuwait, and he mentioned the role that Indian companies can play in the future.
All right, Mr. Ran, thanks very much for being with us on NDTV and sharing your perspective. Indeed, an extremely significant visit by the Prime Minister there. Multiple new avenues being looked at. Trade, of course, as we talked about, continues to be one of the most important cornerstones of our relationship with the Gulf nations.